I'm about to tell you why spending $25,000 to $40,000 on a supercharged motor might be the worst decision you can possibly make when you're looking at a new surf boat. Though, depending on which boat brand you're looking at, you might actually not even have a choice to make that boat work properly. What's up, guys? This is Mitch from Boardco. Today, we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about supercharged engines in wake surf boats. Now, I personally spent thousands of hours behind every major boat brand on the market, and I can tell you there is a massive difference between these engines and how they perform and whether or not you actually need one, depending on which boat you're looking at. By the end of this video, you're going to know whether you need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a supercharged motor, or if you want to put that money towards something else, or maybe even change the boat that you're looking at just because of the info that we are going to hit on. So the first thing we need to talk about is what the different engine options are that are available when it comes to wake surf boats. And this one can get a little bit confusing. When it comes to towboat engines, there are 4 main suppliers and 2 engine manufacturers. The difference between a supplier and a manufacturer is that a manufacturer produces and creates the engine block itself, and the supplier is the one who takes that engine block and gets it ready to go in a boat, or what they refer to as marinizing it. The 2 main engine manufacturers are General Motors and Ford. You probably heard of them. And the 4 engine suppliers are PCM, Inmar, Ilmor, and Malibu. Now, PCM supplies engines for Centurion, Nautique, and Supreme. Inmar supplies engines for Taiga, ATX, Supra, Moomba, and MB. And Ilmor supplies engines for Mastercraft, and Malibu, as you can imagine, marinizes their own engine blocks to go into Malibu and Axis boats. I needed to bring this up for context because it's going to matter a lot moving forward. Now, let's go back to talking about superchargers specifically. There are actually 3 different supercharged engines that you will find in surf boats. 2 are made by General Motors and 1 is made by Ford. The first one is the supercharged GM 6.2 liter sequential fuel injection engine. This is often referred to by things such as a PCM XR7 motor. If you're used to an older supercharged engine, like a 2011 through about 2020 or so, this is typically the one that you will have had experience with. This engine is no longer in production, but it was around for a while, and actually it was a pretty good motor. We put this in a number of boats over the years, and the motor pushed out 550 horsepower and about that same amount of torque roughly. Next up is the Ford Raptor 575 supercharged motor. So this is a great motor, and it's been around for quite a while. It uses sequential port fuel injection just like that PCM 550 motor did. The difference being this motor is actually still currently in production and is put into boat brands that utilize Inmar. These are brands such as Taiga, Supra, and MB. This engine cranks out 510 horsepower and 580 foot-pounds of torque. Now, the third option is the GM 6.2 liter direct injection supercharged motor. It's also referred to as the LT4, and this is the newest, most advanced, and most powerful engine option that is available in surf boats right now. It delivers incredible power and torque, and thanks to the direct injection technology, provides better fuel economy than previous edition supercharged motors. Now, there are some pretty significant differences between the LT4 engines from the different suppliers, but they're all pushing out somewhere in the vicinity of 600 to 640 horsepower and 600 to 670 foot-pounds of torque. Here's what most people don't understand when they're looking at these engine options. More power doesn't always mean better surfing experience. In fact, in many cases, having that extra power is completely unnecessary if the other aspects of your boat are designed for efficiency. And that's really where we need to dive in and talk about how each of these different boat manufacturers functions when it comes to engine power and performance. But before we get into the specific brands, we need to talk about elevation, because it is probably the single biggest determining factor in determining whether you need a supercharged motor. When you go up in elevation, the air becomes less dense. You lose approximately 3 to 4% of your engine's power for every 1,000 feet of elevation that you gain. So if you're here in Utah, like where I am, at around 6,000 feet of elevation, you're looking at a loss of power of 20 to 25% of your engine's power compared to if you were running it at sea level. That is a huge difference. Now, when you're running a wake surf boat, you're not just dealing with the weight of the boat itself, you're also dealing with thousands of pounds of ballast that you're going to fill up to create a surf wave. You've got people in the boat, you got gear, and all of that weight and all of those things require power to move through the water. At low elevations, like down at sea level, many boats, especially lighter weight models, can get away with a non-supercharged motor and perform really well. The engine has power, even at low RPMs, to move that weight through the water and generate a great surf wave. But as you start climbing an elevation, that equation changes dramatically. At higher elevations, you're losing that engine power right when you need it the most. You're trying to move the same amount of weight and you're trying to displace the same amount of water, but your engine is producing way less power while you're doing it. And this is where some boats really start to struggle. And this is where you start seeing boats that can't hit surf speed, and the surf wave will either never form or start to break down because the boat simply does not have enough power to displace the water for a surf wave the way it needs to. Now, there are certain boats that really benefit from and even require a supercharged engine regardless of the elevation. We're talking about bigger, heavier boat models that are carrying more weight and have a heavier hull construction alone. And when you add thousands of pounds of ballast on top of that, they need serious power to move through the water efficiently. But it's not just about the size and weight of the boat. There are some specific characteristics and design elements that cause certain boats to require more power than others. So the first major factor to hit on is hull design. So when we're talking about hull design, it's whether or not a hull is designed for wake surfing or whether it's primarily designed for a different activity. There are some boat hulls that are specifically designed to surf, and they will, generally speaking, have more of a V shape to the hull, particularly at the back end, which is where the water is going to be parting when you're creating a surf wave. A flatter hull shape has some advantages. It's going to be great for water skiing or wakeboarding when the boat is fully up on plane. However, at surf speed, a flatter hull is actually going to create more drag than a V hull, especially when you start having attachments you put on it in order to shift the flow of water from one side to the other. Speaking of shifting the flow of water from one side to the other, the second thing to hit on is surf systems. Now, there's really two main types of surf systems, ones that create more drag and ones that create less drag. If you have a system that goes out the side of the boat, generally speaking, it creates more drag. If you have one that deploys downward, it will generally create less drag. How effective these systems are is going to be based on the hull design that we talked about earlier. But really what it boils down to is if you have a flat hull with a surf system that creates drag, it's going to be a lot less efficient than a V hull with a system that is designed to reduce drag. And that combination of factors is really going to have an impact on how much power do you need in your boat engine. So when we look at the spectrum of boat design and power requirements, it's really helpful to understand that between the three main characteristics, hull design, ballast placement, and surf system operation, each boat manufacturer has taken their own approach, and those approaches have a direct impact on how much power the boat needs to create a surf wave. On one end of the spectrum, you have Malibu, which has taken an approach that requires the most amount of power across all three of these design elements. Malibu uses a flat hull shape with minimal dead rise at the transom. It has its advantages, such as it allows the boat to create a better water ski wake, but it requires significant engine power to displace water effectively because the hull itself isn't designed to run at 11 miles an hour and create a surf wave. Their surf system also creates additional drag. They use the surf gate system, which deploys a gate out the side of the boat and redirects water to create the surf wave, creating additional drag. The system works well and creates a good wave, but the plate hanging off the side of the boat also creates additional drag. On top of that, their ballast is primarily located behind the rear bench seat, which puts a lot of weight at the back tail end of the boat. This creates a very tail-heavy setup that sits deep in the water at the back, which again creates more drag because it changes the angle of the prop. And then on top of all of that, Malibu and Axis have the power wedge, which is a device that deploys at the back of the boat that pulls and sucks the hull down deeper into the water. But that wedge is more hardware at the back of the boat, creating even more drag. All of these elements do have their advantages. Malibu has figured out how to make this combination work, and they create a good surf wave that a lot of people, including myself, really enjoy. But the reality is that this design philosophy also requires the most amount of power to execute. You need a powerful engine in order to overcome all of that drag and to move all of that tail-heavy weight and to displace the water effectively on through their hull design if you want to have any hope of hitting surf speed. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Centurion and Supreme, which utilize a combination of the most efficient hull design for surfing, the most efficient surf system, and the most efficient ballast placement. The OptiV 2.0 hull features a 20-degree dead rise at the transom, along with balance pads on the sides, which naturally part and displace the water with minimal resistance at lower speeds. The hull is working with the water, not fighting against it when you're going 11 miles an hour. The QuickSurf Pro system deploys plates that deploy downwards, along with the Silent Stinger plate system that is in the center, and these plates are integrated into the transom of the boat and sit flush with the hull when they're not deployed. When they are deployed, they're working in harmony with the hull to actually reduce drag and increase the efficiency of the hull when it's shaping and contouring water. This creates minimal additional drag while still giving you complete control over the characteristics of the wave shape and performance. Ballast placement in Centurion is also highly efficient. You got ballast distributed through the middle of the boat, through the bow of the boat, and at the rear of the boat. This creates a more balanced weight distribution so the boat will sit level in the water rather than running really tail heavy. When the boat's balanced, there's less drag, the hull runs more efficiently through the water, and the engine doesn't have to work nearly as hard to maintain speed and create a surf wave. The combination of these three elements mean that Centurion and Supreme boats require significantly less power to generate a surf wave or to hit surf speed when fully loaded. Now, every other manufacturer in the industry falls somewhere between these two ends of the spectrum, with Malibu on one end and Centurion Supreme on the other end. And they have varying power requirements based on their individual design philosophies. Nautique, for example, uses a hull design and surf system that create a huge amount of drag, but their ballast system is a bit better than Malibu's, but maybe not quite as much power as Malibu does. Other brands such as Mastercraft, Taiga, and Supra fall somewhere in the middle. They're more efficient than the traditional flat bottom designs, but they're not as efficient as the DB hulls. Their hull design are generally pretty flat, and they're not going to be as efficient as deep V hulls, and their power requirements reflect that in the middle ground. At sea level with a lighter load, a non-supercharged engine can work fine in these boats, but as you add elevation and as you add weight, as you push the boat harder and harder, you start to see where the design isn't nearly as efficient as it could be, and this is when power becomes a lot more critical. The reason why all of this matters, especially at elevation, is that when you're losing 20% of your engine power at 6,000 feet, a boat that's designed efficiently can still perform at a really high level of elevation with that reduced amount of power. The hull is still displacing water naturally, the surf system isn't creating excess drag, and the balanced ballast placement means the boat is running efficiently through the water. But in a boat that requires maximum power to overcome drag and force the water to move to the side to surf, when you take away 20% of that power, you really start to see performance degrade. The wave gets shorter, it loses power, the boat struggles to maintain consistent surf speed, and the overall experience suffers significantly. Most importantly, what ends up happening is your capabilities to create waves changes, meaning that you may be able to still create a surf wave, but not under all situations. You may not have as much customization or adjustability with your surf wave as you do on other boats, or even as you do at a lower elevation. So, what is the verdict, and how does this play in with superchargers? Which boats really need a supercharged engine at elevation? Well, after spending a lot of time on most of these different boats we've discussed, here's my personal recommendation. On Malibu boats, in my opinion, any of their boats 23 feet and up really need a supercharger to operate properly. I've driven boats like Malibu 23 LSVs with their M6 engine properly for elevation, and simply put, they do not perform at an elevation above 4,000 feet. The same statement applies when it comes to Axis. I've spent time in 22 and 23 foot Axis models, and they just don't really work, in my opinion, unless you put a supercharged motor in them. Next, when you're talking about boats like Nautique, the Paragon series comes standard with a supercharger, but I would personally also put this in any one of the G series boats if you're running above 4,000 feet elevation. Even at lower elevations, the ZZ6 motor is not going to be optimal unless you're right down close to sea level. You can get a ZZ6 engine to work in a Nautique G series at lower elevations, but it's not going to perform optimally unless you're basically right at near sea level. Next, we have Supra and Taiga. And I'm kind of lumping those together because they have similar designs and they also run the same engines. They both run Inmar, and their surf systems and ballast placement are really similar to one another. But if you're talking about these, any of the models 23 feet and up are going to really benefit from a supercharged motor. This is partially due to the hull design, but the biggest factor here is the engine option selection that's available. The next engine tier down from the supercharged engine Inmar lineup is a pretty big drop off in performance. And though these boats are a bit more efficient than boats such as a Malibu or a Nautique, they just don't have an engine option that will work adequately at elevation that isn't supercharged. This is also similar when we're talking about ATX and Moomba as well. A supercharger is really going to be beneficial in these boats, but they are lighter and have less ballast, so you can get away with one of the smaller engine options. It just may not be quite as effective as what you'll get in other boats. Does Mastercraft boats need a supercharger? Honestly, not necessarily. Does it benefit from a supercharger? Yes, for sure. The XT and the NXT models really probably don't need one at elevation. You're going to want one of the bigger engines, but it's not a requirement. But if you're going to the X series models, a supercharger is really nice, but I've driven X24s and X26s at elevation with a 6.2 liter non-supercharged motor. It actually does a fine job. It's not too bad. So is it nice? Yes. Is it required? No. Last up, Centurion and Supreme. As I mentioned previously, Centurion Supreme boats are the most efficient of the bunch. So this is also why they end up having things like the best fuel economy and a quieter overall ride. These are features that are often highlighted when you're looking at Centurion. So the question is a supercharger required? Answer, no. Not in any of the models, not even in like an RI-265. Now, are there benefits to putting a supercharger in one of these boats? Yeah, for sure. It's a really simple equation. What happens when you put a bigger engine in a smaller, lighter car? It gives the car more power. It gives it more top speed. It gives it more out of the gate power, all of those things. That same principle exists here for boats. If you put a bigger engine in a boat that's more efficient, it's going to have more power. What this really translates to, if we're talking about Centurion and Supreme, are higher top end speeds and higher cruising speeds in boats like an RI-245 and RI-265. So if you go from a ZZ6 to a supercharged ZZ8 engine, it will bump your top speed from around 36 miles an hour at elevation to about 41, 42 miles an hour, which can be a real benefit if you're cruising around places like at Lake Powell. But would I personally put a supercharged motor in my boat? No, I wouldn't. And it's not because it isn't awesome, and it's not because power isn't a great thing to have, but it's because I just don't think it's worth the additional expense. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I wouldn't put one in a Malibu or a Nautique or another brand. I'm talking specifically to Centurion and Supreme. I'm also not saying that boats such as a Malibu or a Nautique are poorly designed boats. These companies have been building boats for decades, and they make really good products that a lot of people really love. But they've also chosen a design philosophy that prioritizes certain characteristics, and one of the trade-offs that you have is that it requires a lot more power to execute. So what that means is if you're looking at buying one of these other boats, especially if you're at a higher elevation, you need to understand all of these different details when it comes to motors and factor that into your budget from the very beginning, because in my opinion, it's going to be essential if you want to get the kind of performance that you would expect when you are getting a high-end premium surf boat. You actually want to be able to use it properly. You want the full spectrum of all of the options that you can when creating a surf wave. And what you don't want to do is be pigeonholed into only using your boat with 50% ballast, or only using your boat under certain settings because the engine performance is just not enough for you. I hope this has been helpful information and given you a better understanding of what we are looking at when it comes to supercharged engine. If you want more information such as this, go and check out all of the other videos and content that we've created, as well as check out boardco.com for more information. If you got any questions, reach out to us there and we'd be more than happy to help you out. So once again, this is Mitch from Boardco. Thanks for spending some time with me, and I'll see you out on the water.